The concerns in the region about Iran targeting oil facilities. And there are significant concerns about how this war could disrupt the global economy.
Oil and gas prices spiked today as the regional conflict escalated and shipping was disrupted in the Strait of Hormuz. About 20% of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas flows through the strait every day.
Straits of Hormuz are this choke point in the Persian Gulf. 20% of the world's oil passes through there. And right now you've got ships essentially parked on either side of the strait.
The sudden escalation of tensions in the Persian Gulf has once again exposed how fragile the global energy system truly is. As conflicts surrounding Iran intensified, one of the most critical shipping routes on the planet, the Strait of Hormuz, began to fall silent. This narrow waterway, which connects the Persian Gulf to the open ocean, normally carries nearly 20% of the world's oil and a large share of global liquefied natural gas shipments. Every day, close to 100 massive tankers move through this corridor, transporting energy to Asia, Europe, and North America. But as military threats increased and security conditions deteriorated, commercial shipping companies began pulling their vessels out of the region, creating a chain reaction that is now shaking global markets. The shutdown of tanker traffic has created a dramatic standstill across the Gulf. Ships that were once part of a constant flow of crude oil now sit idle on both sides of the Strait of Hormuz, waiting for a situation that no one can confidently predict. According to maritime reports, nearly 200 tankers became trapped in the surrounding waters after shipping activity collapsed. Each of those vessels carries enormous quantities of crude oil, meaning millions of barrels are effectively stuck at sea. The consequences extend far beyond the ships themselves, because every tanker represents fuel that refineries around the world were expecting to receive. For the crews aboard these vessels, the crisis has become a frightening reality. Many seafarers suddenly found themselves stranded in a volatile war zone with little warning. One crew member described how his tanker had been loading oil when explosions lit the sky nearby. At first, orders came to stop loading the cargo. Hours later, new instructions arrived telling the crew to resume operations despite the growing chaos. The tanker eventually left the port carrying more than 1 million barrels of crude oil, but instead of heading toward international markets, it now sits motionless with over 20 sailors on board, including workers from India and the Philippines. Communication from these ships has become increasingly difficult. Internet access is limited, satellite signals have been disrupted, and GPS systems have occasionally failed. Crews rely on short messages to reassure families back home that they remain safe. Many vessels have enough food and desalinated water to last for roughly 2 months, but rationing could become necessary if the crisis drags on. Meanwhile, fighter jets continue to fly overhead, and distant explosions occasionally light up the night sky, creating a surreal atmosphere for workers who were simply performing routine jobs before the conflict erupted. International maritime organizations are now raising serious concerns about the safety of these seafarers. The International Transport Workers Federation, which represents more than 1.2 million maritime workers worldwide, says sailors often become invisible victims during geopolitical crises. While governments debate strategy and energy markets react to supply disruptions, the crews operating these ships remain trapped in dangerous waters. Maritime unions are receiving urgent messages from sailors asking whether evacuation or crew replacement might be possible, yet ship owners warn that the region has effectively become a no-go zone for commercial movement. The situation has grown even more alarming as violence spreads across the region. Reports indicate that multiple vessels have already been attacked during the escalating conflict, and at least 2 seafarers have lost their lives. A major explosion involving an oil tanker was also reported near the coast of Kuwait earlier this week. Incidents like these are pushing shipping companies further away from attempting to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. At the same time, marine insurance providers have dramatically increased premiums or withdrawn coverage entirely, making voyages through the area financially impossible for many operators. This disruption is sending shockwaves through the global economy because the oil market depends on continuous movement from production fields to refineries. When a route responsible for roughly 1/5 of the planet's energy supply suddenly stops functioning, the impact is immediate. Prices surge, governments scramble to secure alternative supplies, and industries that rely on stable fuel deliveries begin searching for new sources. As countries rush to stabilize their energy needs, one nation is finding itself in an unexpectedly powerful position: Canada. Unlike many oil producers, Canadian energy exports do not rely on the Strait of Hormuz or other unstable Middle Eastern shipping routes. Instead, Canada transports much of its oil through pipelines that connect Alberta's oil sands to coastal export terminals. From there, tankers travel across the Pacific Ocean toward Asian markets without entering the conflict zones that currently threaten Middle Eastern shipments. One of the most important pieces of infrastructure enabling this shift is the pipeline linking Alberta's oil fields to Canada's Pacific coast. This route now carries roughly 890,000 barrels of crude oil each day to coastal terminals, where ships can load cargo and sail west toward Asia. The journey from Canada to Asian markets takes about 10 days, roughly half the time required for traditional Middle Eastern shipments when the Strait of Hormuz is operating normally. Canada's energy reserves further strengthen its position. The country holds approximately 163 billion barrels of proven oil reserves, placing it among the top 4 globally behind Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. Daily production approaches 6 million barrels when combining conventional oil and output from Alberta's massive oil sands operations. These resources give Canada the ability to supply a significant share of global demand, particularly during periods when other regions face instability. Natural gas exports also play a growing role. A major liquefied natural gas facility on the coast of British Columbia now sends LNG shipments to Asia and is capable of supporting around 170 tanker deliveries each year at full capacity. South Korea has already begun purchasing Canadian LNG from this facility, establishing a direct energy link that bypasses the geopolitical risks surrounding Middle Eastern gas supplies. For decades, however, Canada's oil industry operated under a very different dynamic. The vast majority of Canadian crude was sold to the United States because there were few export routes capable of reaching other markets. That limited access often forced Canadian producers to sell their oil at steep discounts compared with global prices. In some cases, Canadian crude traded for $40 to $60 less per barrel than international benchmarks. American refineries benefited from this arrangement because Canadian suppliers had limited bargaining power. Today, the global landscape is shifting rapidly. As disruptions in the Middle East push oil prices toward higher levels, Canadian crude is becoming far more attractive to buyers worldwide. Countries that rarely purchased Canadian energy before are now exploring new supply agreements. India is emerging as one of the most significant potential buyers. The country imports around 90% of its oil and has historically depended heavily on shipments passing through the Strait of Hormuz. With fewer than 10 days of emergency reserves available in storage, Indian officials are under immense pressure to secure reliable suppliers. Reports suggest that during recent discussions, Indian representatives indicated they would purchase whatever Canada could provide. Other nations face similar challenges. Japan relies heavily on imported energy to power its economy, while South Korea already has strong ties to Canadian LNG supplies. European countries are also watching closely, especially after years spent reducing dependence on Russian gas. The possibility that Middle Eastern routes could become unreliable adds another layer of urgency to their energy planning. Canada's growing role in global energy markets is the result of years of infrastructure investment. The expansion of the Trans Mountain Pipeline significantly increased the country's export capacity, nearly tripling the amount of oil that can reach Pacific shipping terminals. Within a year of the expansion, non-American exports of Canadian crude jumped dramatically as buyers across Asia began testing shipments. Massive projects like the $40 billion LNG Canada facility in British Columbia have also transformed the country's export capabilities. The terminal represents the largest private investment in Canadian history and serves as a major gateway for natural gas shipments across the Pacific. The broader economic impact is substantial. Alberta's oil sands industry alone employs more than 150,000 people directly, while supporting hundreds of thousands of additional jobs throughout the supply chain. Rising oil prices increase royalty payments to provincial governments and stimulate investment across sectors ranging from engineering to transportation. The current crisis surrounding the Strait of Hormuz highlights a fundamental truth about global energy. Supply routes matter just as much as the resources themselves. Countries that can deliver energy without relying on vulnerable shipping corridors hold a powerful advantage during times of geopolitical turmoil. As the situation in the Persian Gulf continues to evolve, governments and industries around the world are reassessing their energy strategies. The shutdown of one narrow waterway has demonstrated how quickly global supply chains can be disrupted. In that environment, nations capable of providing stable and secure energy exports may find themselves playing a much larger role in the future of global markets. Thanks for watching Scarlet Drive, and see you next time. Share your experiences and opinions in the comments below. If you found this discussion enlightening, don't forget to subscribe to Scarlet Drive for the latest news and insights.